Foucault had changed the nature of power, but it still maintained the fact that power was something against one could struggle against. And that the notion of power itself, it didn't envisage the notion that the power itself could well have evaporated in the process. And that's a function of Forget Foucault. Foucault went very far, but Foucault himself had to push even further in his own trajectory, in his own spiral, and question the very notion that power was something that could be redirected or occupied at any sort of level it could be. Forget Foucault, in the shadow of the silent majorities, for the first time revealed Baudrillard's power as a polemist. Even Foucault, a formidable opponent, recoiled and stayed silent. With symbolic exchange, Baudrillard found the anthropological axis around which his entire work would now revolve. But his pamphlets also revealed that he was at his most incisive intellectually when engaged in this kind of challenge. He certainly was lucky that in a few decades, the entire world, and France in particular, would get undone at the seam as if it had waited for, Baudrillard had waited for advanced capitalism to finally let go of all its values and turn into a parody of itself. In other words, what I'm introducing is the idea that it is not Baudrillard who made the spiral, but Baudrillard caught on with the movement of capital itself. In other words, there's a point where Baudrillard would say, I stopped being a theorist, the system is more theoretical than I am. Right? Alfred Jarry, you know, Alfred Jarry was a founder of pataphysics. Pataphysics is the science of imaginary solution, and Baudrillard was a student of the founder of the Collège of Pataphysics when he was studying in Reims. And the first organization that Baudrillard belonged to was a circle of pataphysics. And then when it became a little bureaucracy, he left it and only recovered it at the end when he was intronized as a pataphysician at the end of his life. So never forget that the most important element that Baudrillard is not his seriousness, but the fact that it is a seriousness that is the consciousness of the absurdity of the world and of all systems. This is a ubuesque world. Ubu King was the puppet character, the total dictatorial king who was treating his subject like at his whims, right? With an innocence of the cruelty that he was subjected them to. It was a personification of the stupid bourgeoisie that Flaubert had attacked a century earlier. So this is the ubuesque work whose code he would never cease to track down, fascinated by the arrogance and stupidity he elicited as Flaubert had been by the bourgeoisie of his own time. It was also repulsed by its self-satisfied inhumanity. As Jonathan Swift had done before him, he kept pushing for the limits, all too aware there was no boundary to what the species could do to itself and to the planet it happened to inhabit. It was radical absolute humor, as Antonin Artaud had practiced before him, of the kind that only someone looking back on the end of the world could ever conceive. Contrary to what one thought, and maybe to what he himself would have wanted, there was something deeply humanistic and even moralistic about Baudrillard's vision, but to the extreme. He was looking at what was left of the world before the world itself disappeared. He saw the world, he could not believe his eye, how fast and to what extremity it would go in its lust for self-destruction. The system itself was far more extreme in his own theory than any theories could ever be. And it was the system, as I said, who would have the last word, not him. So all that was left for him to do was reveal the system for what it is. In Requiem for the Media, Baudrillard presented the mass as alienated. But were they really manipulated as he himself believed at the time? Were they really the same masses that revolutionary intellectuals attempt to mobilize? the advent of consumerism and the wall-to-wall media environment had drastically changed their status. Baudrillard had to rethink the way he looked at them. Mass and media now were wrapped around each other like in a Möbius strip. Actually, the masses may well turn out to be, as he said, a stronger medium. The masses may be a stronger medium than all of the media, that is, the former envelope. That is a former envelope with the former which envelopes and absorbs the latter, or at least that there is no priority of the media over the masses or the mass over the media. The media environment which capped the process of socialization was fairly recent. It went back at most to the beginning of the industrialized era, when the social was invented for lack of a unified society. But the masses themselves had been around for centuries in one form or another, and the present assault was only the last attempt to subdue them. This question has been first fiercely debated by political theorists ever since Thomas Hobbes in the 17th century violently condemned the populace, as unruly and untrustworthy and borderline entity barely emerging from the state of nature. Instead, Hobbes upheld the people, an emerging social class, the bourgeoisie, shaped and protected by state sovereignty and subjected to its will. At the turn of last century, conservative theorists like Gustave Le Bon and MacDougall still considered crowds in the same disparaging way: volatile, disorderly, criminal, childish, destructive. They were a threat to faltering democracies. Deterritorialized crowds had one major redeeming feature in Gustave Le Bon's eye: their yearning for servitude and their readiness to embrace charismatic leaders. This early call, that's 1920s, this early call to ideological fanaticism certainly wasn't lost on fascist leaders in the 20s and beyond, because Hitler learned a lot from Le Bon, and so did Mussolini, of course, among others. Countering Hobbes, Spinoza was the first to oppose that trend and create for these freewheeling masses a more upbeat and fluid concept called multitude, a powerful multiplicity unfettered by the state or by any kind of representation. Contrary to the people of Hobbes, the multitude resisted unity to assert its irreducible plurality and autonomy. Formerly considered a threat, the multitude kept flowing under the structures and institutions that attempted to appropriate it, the way pagan deities resisted the church's effort to co-opt them and resurfaced in the throes of fascism. Marxism attempted as well to extract from this multitude a more unified class, narrowly defined by industrial workers, subjected to labor discipline and assembly line oppression. The working class was an exclusive concept since it didn't include non-wage material laborers, both in the city and in the country. It also rejected social residues, maintained in the ambivalent status of the lumpen proletariat and easily turned into mobs and scabs. It's this intense process of socialization triggered by consumer society, technological innovation, and the powerful rise of media culture return the masses or the multitude, the working class, to their anomic state, floating and indeterminate, directly shaped by the flux of capital. The masses came to share their radical indifference and uncertainty, loss of meaning, loss of dialectics, lot of history, etc. In the shadow of the silent majority, written then in 1977,